Great. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. I almost said this morning because we usually have morning meetings. Welcome to the Homeless Leadership Coalition's quarterly meeting. Thank you for joining us. We're excited to share with you all some of the preliminary data that we have from 2023's PIT count. A lot of work goes into collecting this information, which we couldn't do without our providers and volunteers from this last year. And I'm going to cue you up, Ben. We have Ben Scott, who handles all of our data with our data lead, Neighbor Impact. He will be presenting the point in time count presentation this afternoon. If you can share, let us know if you have any issues with that, Ben. Cool. Looks great.
How does that look? Look good?
Yeah, it looks awesome.
All right. Just rearrange some stuff so I can see the chat.
I'll monitor the chat for you, Ben, and then
Okay.
I'll bring it up if we have a question.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay, ready to get started then?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm Ben Scott. I'm the Unhoused Services Data Coordinator with Neighbor Impact. And today I'll be presenting on the 2024 PIT count. Just going over some of the preliminary results. I do want to kind of emphasize preliminary. I know we're this might be a little earlier than we get results out each year, and really the timeline for reporting to HUD, having the finalized data set, is to get this submitted by the end of the month. But that being said, I want this particular session presentation to be something that is less, I guess, really me kind of telling you all as a community what the data says, and you know, pulling out some hard statistics, and to be more of kind of this exploratory working with you all interactive. So if you can have questions or anything you want to interject in the chat, comments, please put it there. And Eric, if you want to just let me know if anything relevant comes up there, you can just jump in, and I'll pause and try to address it during the presentation. All right, so getting started. What is the PIT count? A lot of you all know most of this information, and we went over a lot of this if you were involved with the actual PIT count and with the trainings in late fall in December as we were prepping for that. But I'll just cover this as so that we all have background on what we're talking about. So the point in time count is a single night census of individuals experiencing homelessness. This includes both sheltered and unsheltered individuals. And it takes place in the last 10 days in January every year. This year it was the 23rd. That was the actual night of the PIT. But we conduct this survey, this census really, for the full week. So Tuesday, the 23rd, kind of through the following Monday, it gives us time to ask about that specific night. But we do it over the course of a week. So who's involved? The survey participants and their families, anyone who's experiencing homelessness in Crook, Deschutes, Jefferson, or the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs Reservation. So the respondents are the participants, and then there's also the survey administrators. So a lot of the service providers that are on this call, a lot of you all participated in this, and we're very grateful for your contribution to this effort. We had 95 individuals who submitted surveys in the Counting Us platform, and I'm sure more within HMIS. Yeah, so why do we conduct this count? For one, it's mandated by HUD that we do this, and it gives us a snapshot of state of homelessness in our region, in our continuum. It helps us to pursue funding opportunities, both state and federal. It helps us to show the need in our community. It also helps us to guide how we allocate those funds to address homelessness within our community. So getting into the methodology, again, some of this is borrowed from the training slides, so this might be old for some of you, but I've tweaked it a little bit to update. So that we use two different platforms to collect information for this effort. Two different platforms and 4 different surveys or assessments, and I kind of call these instruments as well later, which I'll make sure we're clear on. But HMIS, which is our standard data system for all of our homeless services, it's what any COC, that's the HUD continuum of care funding or ESG funding, is required to use HMIS, but we also just use it as our general homelessness management system, and it stands for Homeless Management Information System. The other platform we use is the Counting Us app. This is an app that is specifically designed for administering the point-in-time count, and this app is primarily for the unsheltered count, but there are some sheltered individuals in that platform as well. It's also important to point out at this point that all of this information is self-reported data. It's not independently verified. We're not checking up on this information. So this data is as good as the respondents in the survey give us. So essentially it's their perception of their situation. It's their self-reported state of being at the time. So getting in a little bit more in depth on the definitions, as I said a little bit earlier, there's sheltered and unsheltered components of this count. The sheltered count includes individuals and families living in a supervised, publicly or privately operated shelter, or temporary living arrangement. So this includes all of our emergency shelters, all of our transitional housing options, and some of institutions like jails or hospitals, depending on where that individual entered the institution from. So if they're in a homeless situation prior to entering that institutional setting, they will be considered homeless and sheltered at the time. Unsheltered is anyone, individuals or families residing in places not meant for habitation. So this includes outside locations, cars, abandoned buildings, recreational vehicles, with the caveat that they don't have hookups. So this might be a little bit of a tangent, but it's important to note that there are some categories that aren't included in this count as well. So any individuals who are doubled up, which would be considered people who are living with another family, they're housed And so just to say that they are not included in this count. We do collect information on doubled up folks, but for the purposes of the official HUD pit count, they're not included here. So in the months since the pit count, I've been working on doing some of the data cleanup, data formatting, and I just wanted to give a little bit of an overview of what that process looks like. So given that there's a couple different platforms that we're pulling data from, it takes some time to kind of clean and massage the data and pull that together into one unified data set. So what I do is I start with the Counting Us data set, pull that down, remove duplicates. And this year there was approximately 112 removed. I'm saying approximately because I'm relying on a note that I left as to why I archived these. And next year, I'm definitely going to be a little bit more detailed in that note so that I can give, just cross out this approximately and give some exact numbers there. So starting with the Counting Us data set, deduplicate within that, then I'm pulling data from HMIS, which is our standard data system. Kind of creating uniform format, combining those two data sets after the variables are matching up and consistent. And then there's kind of this second deduplication process where an individual may have been in a shelter the night of the pit, but then be out and be interviewed again. And, they're not intending to be counted twice, but they're not aware that maybe we're pulling data from the shelter. So there's another couple duplicates removed there. And then the main limitation I wanted to bring up here is the unsheltered observation tally. So this is one of the options within Counting Us, and it's reserved for people who aren't willing or able to give a full response to the survey. And we still want to count those people, but we just don't have the ability to collect a lot of information at that time. So a lot of times when I'm doing this deduplication, I'm using name and date of birth. And these observation tallies have less of that information that I need to kind of deduplicate there. So there's potential for duplicates that aren't caught, and that's a limitation. There are other limitations that kind of go in the opposite direction, which would be that we just don't have the capacity to cover all of the area in Central Oregon. So, when we're considering limitations of this data, there's potential for some duplicates, but there's also potential that we're missing people, and you just have to kind of take that all into account when we're looking at this data and take it with a little bit of a grain of salt and try to interpret appropriately given these limitations. So I'm going to start getting into some of the numbers here. On the left side here, you'll see under characteristic or the instrument. This is like instrument as in the collection tool used to administer a survey, collect information on the individual respondent. So there are 3 different Counting Us instruments or surveys that were used. There's that unsheltered person observation tally that we mentioned, I mentioned earlier. There's a sheltered option 2, which would be typically reserved for our service providers that aren't using Counting Us or aren't using HMIS. So those providers that aren't funded by a COC fund or ESG. Or there are some DV providers, domestic violence providers that have their own system and so might be using Counting Us for the sheltered count. The majority of the unsheltered count is going to be coming from the Counting Us app as well. And then all of our HMIS data, which is our, yeah, thanks, Eric, Emergency Solutions Grant is ESG. The majority of the sheltered data is coming from HMIS because our providers are set up there. So that's the left side, and the across the top is the count that you'll see more throughout the presentation. Both emergency shelter and transitional housing are part of the sheltered count, and unsheltered is everyone who is living in a place not meant for habitation or in a vehicle, again, fitting that category. And you can see there's some overlap. So like some of our sheltered count did come from Counting Us, but the majority of it came from HMIS. And I just wanted to put this out there to show kind of how we're pulling this data set together from a couple different sources, just to kind of give a little bit more insight on how this is prepared. So if you see across the top here, we have 550, 66, and 1195. That's our kind of the base high level numbers that we're reporting to HUD. And on this next slide, you can see the PIT count over the past several years since 2009, and that 2024 at the bottom, those are those numbers. So that sheltered emergency shelter, sheltered transitional housing, and then unsheltered count there, and then a total of 1811. As I said in the beginning, I wanted to emphasize this is preliminary. I don't expect this will change a lot, but part of what I want to do here today is show what I'm seeing, but I'm recognizing that I'm kind of the only one that's looked closely at this data. So part of this is I want to get feedback from you all too. If you see anything in the upcoming slides that stick out and you say, hey, that doesn't look right, I want to know. We have the rest of the month to finalize this data and get it into shape to submit and get the official results out. So yeah, just saying preliminary again, just to highlight that. But here is that same data in a line graph. And as you can see, there are a couple years we didn't do an unsheltered count, and it's really creating some noise up and down here, but overall we can see the trend, and if we smooth out these lines, you can see that you know, the general trend is that our unhoused population is increasing. And I do think it's kind of interesting, you know, 2009 post-housing crisis, kind of high and then down, and then we're swinging back up again pretty dramatically. These gray buffer zones, you can see that they're much wider up here, partially because of the noise from not conducting unsheltered counts on several years, and they're much narrower in these sheltered emergency shelter and transitional housing trend lines down here. But overall, increasing unhoused population in our region. This slide is again, these preliminary counts for cities. I realize now that they're kind of, the order is flipped, which is a little weird. This data here will be kind of the last time I'm presenting on city or town based, and the rest will be more county and then population based or different kind of categorical variables. But yeah, and some of these towns I've had to combine. So when we're looking at South Deschutes, that's including Lapine, Sun River, Three Rivers, Terrebonne is combined with Crooked River Ranch. That number is pretty small. But overall, this is kind of what you would expect. Our bigger city, Bend, has the majority of the count, and then kind of distributed throughout. Okay, so this slide is a breakdown of the sheltered and unsheltered count within each county. And I just wanted to pull this up to show you know, obviously the counts are higher for Deschutes, but we can look at the breakdown of the percentages and see, you know, Deschutes County has a higher percentage of sheltered than others. And I think that's more because of the resources. Jefferson County, I think there might be something that we need to circle back on there. I think some people are being counted as sheltered when they should be an unsheltered count, because I think 60% seems high, and that's something that I'd like feedback on if you all have any thoughts on that. Any providers from Jefferson County, you can talk to Tony. Here's a similar graph, and we're looking at kind of the same format, but instead of sheltered versus unsheltered, we're looking at chronicity. So chronically homeless versus non-chronically homeless. The definition of chronically homeless would be someone who has been unhoused for 12 months or longer, or has been unhoused 4 or more times over the past 3 years, and those 4 periods of time add up to 12 months or more. So it's trying to get at a definition that HUD uses to kind of delineate between people who are kind of have fallen into this pattern, and it's something that we like to look at to maybe strategize. And if you have a higher chronic homeless population, you might have different interventions than elsewhere. So as you can see here, we have a higher non-chronic population across the board, except for Jefferson County. And again, just overall higher rates in Deschutes County. Yeah, and we also use chronicity and looking at chronic homelessness populations to prioritize some of these resources, as Eric said in the chat there. I also wanted to look at age distribution by county. Again, just the amplitude, that the numbers are going to be higher in Deschutes County, but what I wanted to compare a little bit more is the shape of these distributions. So I think the and it's likely due to the services available in Deschutes County just being a bigger county, but there's a higher youth population there. And that makes sense based on where our youth resources are, but just another way to kind of look at the data without being overly fixated on these numbers. This was kind of one of the things I wanted to do, is to look at data in a way that kind of pulled out the visualization, the visual aspect of it. So similar figure on the next slide, but what I'm doing is looking at chronicity with age distribution by county. And you can start to pull out some of these trends. So like you can see in Deschutes County, we have a chronic population that skews older than the non-chronic population, just by how the different how the colors compare. You can see there's higher red in Deschutes County, and you can see it in the other counties as well, but it's much more pronounced in Deschutes, and that might just be more data available to kind of see that pattern and pull it out. Here's another age distribution by gender this time and shelter status. So we're looking at sheltered on the left and unsheltered on the right. And then male is in green, female is in this kind of salmon. And then we also have trans, non-binary, and different identity that registers a little bit there. What I thought was interesting from this is male population skews older, and generally looks like more likely to be unsheltered. The trans, non-binary, and different identity is kind of in this younger age band, 25 to 40. Yeah. And then this is the last one of these histogram charts, if you're tired of looking at these. And again, this is kind of the same thing, but instead of sheltered and unsheltered, we're looking at chronic versus non-chronic. And again, what we're seeing is like a male population that skews older in both the chronic and the non-chronic, but a higher male population in the older age bands in the chronic. And then again, this trans, non-binary, different identity, kind of in this younger middle age range. All right, so this figure is time in Central Oregon. How long have you lived in Central Oregon? We did have more categories that I collapsed into these age bands. So less than 1 year, 1 to 5 years, 5 to 10, and then greater than 10 years. And you can tell from this figure that a lot of our homeless population has been here for quite a long time. Just looking at this distribution, the majority of our unhoused population has been in Central Oregon for 10 years or more. All right, so I also wanted to look at the racial breakdown, and I had one more thing I could have done for this presentation. It would have been pulling in the just the overall demographic breakdown of the COC. I know that majority of Central Oregon is white, and that this breakdown would be really interesting to look at. Yeah, so the total of 1509 this is only for the respondents that reported a race. I think there was around 400 observation tallies of 350. So I would assume that most of those were not getting race, or so this is pretty good coverage actually for collecting data on race, given that there are a lot of those observation tallies in there as well. But yeah, as you can see, we have a higher American Indian, Alaska Native, and Hispanics population as far as our non-white. And yeah, as we kind of put out more official PIT stats, this is definitely something I want to include, is a comparison with the overall racial population for the COC. Yeah, good point, Denise. Include those missing or not reported as well. So here I did a better job of calling out the number of respondents indicating a cause. So we had 682 that we had some information for cause of homelessness, and yeah, at the top we have unemployment and inability to afford rent, followed by other, and that was a variety of different reasons in that other category. And then eviction, fleeing, domestic violence, kicked out. As you can see, it drops off more quickly after that. This is a difficult one. I would have liked to have more information on this, more complete data here, more respondents, but as the survey goes on, it's harder to get more data. We want to ask all these questions because I think it's valuable information to have to know why people are falling into homelessness. But as the survey gets longer, the less complete the data gets. Eric, you're raising your hand.
Yeah, so Joanna asks, are any of the causes drastically different from other years, i.e. affordability or unemployment?
I don't know. That's a good question, and that's something I'd like to look at. One, I've avoided comparing to other years aside from overall trends, mostly because there's a lot of manual, some of that manual data cleaning process I talked about at the beginning. I didn't do that for previous years, so I'm hesitant to pick up another year's data set and try to kind of comb through that. But that is something we can try to do as as we come up with a more complete kind of final executive overview of the PIT.
And Holly asks, how might improvement changes in technology and process used for the PIT count affect the data over time?
Yeah, so I'm probably too invested in trying to use software other than Excel. But that is one thing that can really help, because when you're using something like Excel to come up with these, and you can see at the end I've switched to using Excel. But the more you can use kind of code-based analysis software, the more you can standardize how that's being pulled and make that process the same year over year, which is, it's a heavy lift, but once it's done, it makes things a lot easier. And I am all for doing as much of that as we can.
And Jeannie asks about being able to show causes by county.
Yeah, I think I could do that for this year. That would be possible. And that would be interesting to look at.
Caitlin Green asks if the other option was a write-in response. If so, were there any themes?
It was a write-in. Yeah, it would be, I would like to take the time to kind of categorize those and kind of pull out those themes just from looking at through some of those. One of the kind of bigger other things that popped up was divorce, and which I don't know if that is a category that we had, so that might be why that's popping up more in the other category, but that was something that stuck out to me, was like divorce or changes in family dynamics, things like that. Okay, this is my last data slide, and it sounds like we've gotten into some of the questions and discussion, but after this, I'm just gonna open it up to whatever you all wanna talk about. Not whatever, but we'll put some constraints in there. So this is medical providers access, 535 responses. Again, this is kind of towards the end of the survey, but yeah, this is interesting to see. I think I already received a little bit of feedback on this. Like Mosaic only having 5, indicating that doesn't seem accurate, I guess. But they're further down on the list in a question that's farther down on the survey. So yeah. But anyway, as you can see, emergency room and urgent care are by far the top ones, which it's kind of to be expected. I think among this population, and unfortunate, and it kind of highlights the need for services that are working for this population in a medical capacity.
Ken asked a question about the survey instruments. How standardized are they? I replied to him that there are optional questions that are specific to our COC that were added. Can you speak to that, Ben?
Yeah, so there's a standardized, like, non-optional HUD questions that we ask and we aren't allowed to alter at all, and that's makes sense. That's HUD as a federal agency wanting uniform data across the board. But then there is all of the optional custom questions that we're allowed to do, and this medical providers question comes from that set. So yeah.
I was just gonna add that also, areas or COCs get to identify like how they're gonna do the count. So we use the Counting Us app. And not all communities use that. Some people still do like paper and tally it. But a lot of communities use Counting Us.
Oh, Mike Wilson, you're asking equals 98%. So, these options aren't, what's the word I'm looking for?
You can
Like
choose
where
You can
they-
select multiple options. It's not mutually exclusive. It's not like multiple choice. It's checkbox. So of the 535 who responded, 63% of them checked emergency room, but they could also check others. So that is what that percentage means. It's 61% of the 535. If you add all these numbers up, it won't equal 535. It'll be more because it's counting essentially every time one of these was selected.
And the question that's asked is, like, where do you seek out medical, like, where do you oftentimes access medical care? And so, if folks identify the emergency room or urgent care, it's good information for us to know, around like, are people connected to medical care, like a provider that they're seeing regularly, or are they still seeking out like crisis, when they're in crisis, seeking out medical care then?
And Casey's question is about how many of the total PIT respondents came from a count of medical providers like Mosaic. Is that something you could subdivide by user for Counting Us?
Yeah, I could look at the users submitting the survey and see that they're associated with Mosaic.
And then the second question, we have one from Cynthia from St. Charles, which was, how did we decide on these providers for the medical providers question? She asked, is there a Department of Health for Deschutes County or a mobile clinic for Mosaic? My understanding is that the Mosaic clinics option was the one that we used if folks were saying, hey, I normally get my medical care at the mobile van.
Yeah, I think on a previous year, maybe last year's iteration, there was like Mosaic clinics and there was mobile. And I think the decision was to combine those into the two. And yeah, the providers listed, that is part of our planning process. So if you're interested in getting providers added or changing the configuration of the providers listed here, that would be something that you could do in one of our planning meetings that we have in the lead up to the pit.
And then the next question is from Counselor Perkins. Thank you for being here. She asks about Juniper Ridge and China Hat. Do we feel confident that they were included in the count?
Yeah, they are in the city count. They're pulled into the Bend count, I believe, but there's definitely when we look at the map and the live data coming in Counting Us, you can definitely pick out those hotspots as areas that yeah.
And there were significant outreach efforts made, keeping in mind though that the majority of outreach efforts were done during business hours, and there are a lot of folks who work during those times, or maybe are not available during those times, or the camps are not as active. And that's just kind of the confines to like the amazing work like that the providers can do. And so we definitely didn't get everyone. But there were a couple different outreach events to both Juniper Ridge and China Hat.
And Marissa asks about the other field on this particular slide. If this was a free text response, if so, do we see any themes?
It was a free text response. Off the top of my head, I don't know about any themes. It looks like there's only 26, so it wouldn't be too hard to look and see.
I just want to speak to Jeannie's question in the chat about seeing data about the trend of retirees and the gap between income and housing. I'm not sure that that is something that's going to be specifically captured in the PID count data because it includes information about income and housing as it pertains to like a factor of income. And so those are not generally questions that are asked on the PID count. There's some data we could infer, especially from different some of the different tables that Ben shared today about people's ages and where those ages, those age ranges are concentrated throughout the region. You'll notice that some of the older age ranges exist more prominently in the overall population of Jefferson and Crook counties, whereas in Deschutes County, you have a higher concentration in the bell curve of folks who are younger. But then you also notice that chronically homeless individuals tend to be older. They tend to be older adults, not necessarily of retirement age, but they tend to not be younger in Deschutes County based on the chart that was shared. So that's it's kind of a nuanced question, but I'm happy to connect with you more, Jeannie, in order to try to get you to some of the where you might be able to access that data.
And Annie asked a great question in the chat, if this information and like once everything's finalized will be on our website. The answer to that, I was gonna say that, but Ben's presentation, the recording of this meeting, any other updates to data, or like if we do like any graphics for folks for individual communities, that will all be on the cohomeless.org website.
So Mike asked about Crook County doing much better on outreach this year. It's true that the one of the slides did show that the unsheltered count in Crook County was over 200 individuals, and that is a big departure from previous years. Is there a way to separate homeless since last year versus homeless longer than a year, but counted for the first time specific to each county? Ben, you want to speak to how you might do breakdowns by county and compare them to previous years? Because if you're not planning on doing that, like for the whole reporting, then that might be something that we get a specific data ask for the data team at Neighbor Impact to address when they're able to with their staff time.
Yeah, so there part of the how we come up with the chronic classification, we might be able to pull in some of those questions and kind of see like first time homeless. Yeah, that question has there's a lot of components to it. I might have to think about that, how we would kind of come up with a answer to that question given what we have.
And Ginny asks about the timeline for having final numbers. Do you plan on sending an update to this that we can disseminate to the membership once you send it into HUD?
Yeah, so final numbers are due to HUD at the end of the month. So once those final numbers are done, Lindsay Staling, I think, is out this week. has offered to kind of do some more, I guess, offered support from Mosaic's data folks, and that's something I'm looking to kind of take her up on. So what I'd like to do, and I guess I don't necessarily want to promise anything that we haven't like discussed or finalized, but I think it would be really interesting to kind of get more hands on the data and like use their expertise to kind of create, you know, once it is finalized, something that is, you know, beyond this PowerPoint presentation, which I guess a more like finalized, polished thing, dashboard, whatever the format is, something. But that's something that I'm thinking about, that we've kind of played with. I don't want to like say for sure, but we will provide some update with final numbers when they are out, whatever the format is.
Great. Does anyone else have any other questions? Oh, have we tried to expand counting outside of business hours to capture more folks? I think that is something that we have talked about. I think there's a lot of ways that we would like to expand the count and maybe add more capacity. And we've talked about having like, oh, sorry, I just saw another chat, got distracted. Having, you know, some more regular meetings leading up to the pit count, like maybe starting planning sooner to kind of do that, because I think it would really, we would need more volunteers to do that type of thing, and likely would need to focus seasoned folks to do the night count, because we wouldn't want to have just anyone just wandering around where people are sleeping. So we'd have to be really intentional around that. But yes, we have talked about it. All right, so the questions have kind of slowed. I know you guys may think of something after we're done with this meeting that you want to ask. You can reach out to info@cohomeless.org. If you have any specific questions, there were some really good questions around specific data that you'd like to see for your communities. And I think we have a lot of work that was put into this by providers and volunteers. And again, we just want to offer our thanks to you, Ben, for your amazing, very thorough presentation. And also to the providers who really makes this possible, who made this possible this year for us to have this data. And just wanting to highlight the communities who really leaned in to the work, looking at, you know, Crook County and other communities where we haven't had numbered, like really solid data on people experiencing homelessness in those communities. I think it's really powerful to see the work that they did this year, and others who have you know, every year do this work. So I just want to say thank you to all of you guys. We didn't really get to any community updates. I know Johanna, she popped something to the chat that she had wanted to share with you guys. So please look at that for camp. And yeah, if you guys have any other questions, reach out to info@cohomeless.org. Thank you guys.